The Pripyat River cuts a dark ribbon through the Polesian lowlands, its waters carrying the ancient sediment of Belarus and Ukraine toward the Dnieper. On this night in late April, the air hangs thick with the promise of spring rain, and the forests surrounding the nuclear complex pulse with the first stirrings of life after a brutal winter. Temperature readings show 12 degrees Celsius, humidity at 87%, wind from the southeast at 4 kilometers per hour. In the control room of Reactor 4, senior reactor control engineer Leonid Toptunov watches the luminous dials of his console with growing unease. The test protocol calls for a controlled reduction of power output, a routine safety exercise designed to verify emergency cooling systems. But the reactor's behavior tonight defies every calculation, every prediction encoded in the operating manual that sits dog-eared beside his logbook. The local population of Pripyat sleeps unaware, 36,000 souls nestled in their concrete apartment blocks, their windows dark against the industrial glow of the plant. Children dream of May Day parades. Factory workers rest before another shift at the Jupiter plant. Teachers prepare lessons for Monday morning classes that will never come. But in the villages scattered throughout the exclusion zone that does not yet exist, the Babushyas know. They have known for 3 days now, ever since the blackbirds came. The phenomenon began on 23rd April, when Svetlana Kozlova, 73 years old and keeper of oral traditions in the village of Kapachi, reported the first sighting to her grandson, a security guard at the plant's perimeter. A creature, she told him, larger than any raven, with eyes that burned like embers and wings that cast shadows too deep for the pale spring sun. It perched on the Orthodox cross atop the village church. And when Father Dmitri approached with blessed salt and holy water, the thing spoke in a voice like grinding metal. Woe to those who split the atom's heart. Woe to those who wake what sleeps in the earth. Similar accounts emerged from Zalishya, from Yanov Station, from the scattered farmsteads along the Pripyat's banks. Always the same description: a corvid of unnatural size, its presence accompanied by an electric taste in the air and the sudden silence of all other birds. Local folklore, rooted in centuries of Slavic tradition, recognized the signs immediately. The prophetic raven, harbinger of calamity, had returned to the land of their ancestors. The plant's administrative staff dismissed these reports as peasant superstition, the product of rural minds grappling with the incomprehensible technology that now dominated their landscape. Dr. Viktor Brukhanov, the plant's chief engineer, filed the security reports without comment. The Soviet system had no mechanism for processing omens, yet the reports persisted, growing more detailed and more disturbing with each passing hour. Maintenance worker Fyodor Sherbina swore he glimpsed the creature perched atop the massive ventilation stack of Unit 4 during his Thursday evening rounds. Radiation monitor Yuri Korneev noted anomalous readings near the cooling pond, brief spikes that registered and faded before he could verify the instruments. The thing was drawn to places of heat and energy, the reports suggested. It had been seen near the electrical transformers, silhouetted against the glow of the turbine hall's windows, circling the reactor buildings in lazy, predatory loops. Each sighting left witnesses with the same sensation, a hollow ache in the chest, as if something vital had been drained away. Now, at 23 minutes past 1 in the morning, as Toptunov's readings spiral beyond all parameters and the reactor's control rods refuse to respond to his increasingly desperate commands, those reports seem less like folklore and more like prophecy. The last entry in the control room logbook, written in Toptunov's careful script, reads, "Power surge detected. Emergency shutdown initiated. All systems nominal." The ink is still wet when the explosion comes. Outside, in the cooling darkness above the plant, something with wings like torn night circles once more, waiting for the fire to begin. The first official acknowledgement of the disaster comes not from the plant's management, but from a radiation monitoring station in Sweden, 1,400 kilometers to the northwest. By dawn, as the radioactive plume drifts across the Scandinavian peninsula, the Kremlin can no longer maintain the fiction that nothing has happened. Boris Sherbina, deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers, receives his mobilization orders at 0530 hours Moscow time. A career bureaucrat with no nuclear expertise, he finds himself appointed as the civilian head of what will become known as the Government Commission on the Chernobyl accident. His mandate is simple: contain the crisis, minimize international embarrassment, and above all, prevent panic among the Soviet population. The helicopter carrying Sherbina and his technical advisor, nuclear physicist Valery Legasov, lifts off from Vnukovo Airport at 0815 hours. Their destination, a disaster zone that officially does not exist. Throughout the 90-minute flight, Legasov briefs his superior on the theoretical implications of a reactor explosion, but neither man comprehends the magnitude of what awaits them. Meanwhile, in the forests surrounding the plant, the first liquidators are already mobilizing. Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Pikolov, commander of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment's Chemical Defense Battalion, arrives with his advanced reconnaissance team at 0730 hours. His vehicles are standard NBC detection units, BTR-60PB armored personnel carriers equipped with radiation monitoring equipment, decontamination systems, and atmospheric sampling devices. Pikolov's initial survey reveals radiation levels that exceed his instrument's maximum detection threshold. The dosimeter needles slam against their upper limits and remain there, registering readings that should be physically impossible outside of a weapons test. His radiological reconnaissance teams, equipped with DP5V portable detectors, document contamination zones extending in irregular patterns across the landscape, as if guided by some intelligence beyond wind and weather. But it is Senior Sergeant Nikolai Melnik, a veteran of Afghanistan and the regiment's most experienced NBC specialist, who first reports the anomaly that will haunt every subsequent operation. During his 0845 hours perimeter sweep, 2 kilometers south of the plant, Melnik encounters what he describes in his field report as a large corvid specimen exhibiting aberrant behavioral patterns. The creature, according to Melnik's testimony, appeared immune to the radiation levels that had already begun affecting his equipment. His Geiger counter, which had been clicking frantically since entering the contamination zone, fell silent in the animal's presence. The bird perched on a birch tree stripped bare by the invisible fire of gamma rays, its black feathers showing no signs of radiation damage while the surrounding vegetation withered in real time. Most disturbing was the creature's apparent intelligence. When Melnik attempted to photograph it for his biological survey report, the bird fixed him with what he later described as eyes like burning coals and spoke a single word in what sounded like Ukrainian: smrt, death. The photograph, when developed, showed only an empty branch against a dead sky. By 1100 hours, the Government Commission has established its forward command post in the abandoned Pripyat Municipal Building. Sherbina, overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster, authorizes the deployment of additional military assets. The 6th Independent Motor Rifle Regiment from Chernihiv, helicopter squadrons from the 230th Helicopter Regiment, and specialized radiological units from across the Western Soviet Union. Dr. Legasov, meanwhile, struggles to reconcile the physical evidence with known nuclear physics. The reactor's graphite core continues to burn at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, spewing radioactive isotopes into the atmosphere at rates that defy calculation. But the pattern of contamination suggests forces beyond mere meteorology at work. Local Fire Chief Leonid Telyatnikov, one of the first responders to reach the reactor building, provides the commission with an account that challenges rational explanation. His firefighters, he reports, encountered a creature of unusual size and behavior while attempting to extinguish the initial blaze. The thing had perched atop the destroyed reactor hall, silhouetted against the blue-white glow of exposed nuclear fuel, seemingly unaffected by radiation levels that killed men in minutes. It watched us, Telyatnikov reports to Legasov, in a voice hoarse from smoke inhalation and radiation exposure. Like it was waiting for something, like it knew what was coming before we did. The Commission's first priority is evacuation. At 1400 hours, the order comes down from Moscow. The entire population of Pripyat must be relocated within 36 hours. The operation, designated Spring Cleanup, will require 1,216 buses, 300 trucks, and 3 passenger trains. But as the evacuation begins, reports continue to filter in from military units throughout the zone. The Blackbird is everywhere and nowhere, appearing to radiation teams, evacuation personnel, and cleanup crews with disturbing regularity. Each sighting follows the same pattern: a moment of electronic silence, the appearance of the creature, and a message delivered in various regional dialects, always carrying the same meaning. Death is coming. Death is here. Death has already arrived. Major Igor Kostin banks his Mi-8 helicopter in a wide arc around the destroyed reactor, his Nikon camera trained on the smoking ruins below. As the Soviet Air Force's chief photographer for nuclear incidents, Kostin has documented everything from weapons tests to submarine accidents, but nothing has prepared him for the apocalyptic landscape stretching beneath his aircraft. The reactor building appears as a grotesque wound in the earth, its concrete walls split open like a cracked egg. Blue-white flames dance where the graphite core burns exposed to the sky, casting an ethereal glow that penetrates even the daylight. His radiation badge, checked just 20 minutes ago, has already darkened to a deep amber, a warning that his exposure is approaching dangerous levels. But it is not the radiation that makes Kostin's hands tremble as he adjusts his camera settings. Perched on what remains of the reactor's ventilation stack, clearly visible through his telephoto lens, sits the creature that has haunted every briefing, every intelligence report, every whispered conversation among the liquidator crews. The Blackbird appears larger in person than the reports suggested, easily the size of a small child, with wings that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. Through his viewfinder, Kostin watches as the thing turns its head toward his aircraft with deliberate, almost mechanical precision. For a moment that stretches beyond time, photographer and subject regard each other across the poisoned air. Then the bird opens its beak and speaks, not the single words reported by ground teams, but a full sentence that somehow reaches Kostin despite the helicopter's roar and the closed cockpit. Tell them what you have seen, image maker. Tell them what comes for all who split the peaceful atom. Kostin's camera captures 27 frames before his equipment begins to malfunction. Later analysis will show that each photograph contains the same image, an empty ventilation stack against a background of smoke and flame. The bird, despite being clearly visible to the naked eye, casts no shadow and leaves no trace on film. On the ground, the liquidation effort continues with grim efficiency. General Nikolai Antoshkin, commander of the helicopter operations, coordinates sand and boron drops from his command post in a commandeered school building 12 kilometers from the reactor. His pilots report consistent anomalies during their approach runs, electronic interference that follows no known pattern, sudden temperature drops inside their cockpits, and the persistent sensation of being observed. Captain Alexander Serebriakov, piloting Mi-26 heavy-lift helicopter serial number 06, files the most detailed account. During his 15 hours bombing run, carrying a payload of neutron-absorbing materials intended to slow the nuclear reaction, Serebriakov encounters the creature at an altitude of 200 meters directly above the reactor core. It appeared from nowhere, Serebriakov reports to his debrief officer. One moment clear sky, the next this, presence. My instruments went dead, radio, navigation, engine monitoring systems, everything. But the engines kept running. The bird, if that's what it was, flew alongside us for 30 seconds, maintaining perfect formation speed. Then it spoke. The message, according to Serebriakov, was delivered in flawless Russian with a Moscow accent. Your offerings are noted, Sky Warrior, but they will not be enough. The fire in the earth burns deeper than your wisdom reaches. When Serebriakov's instruments returned to normal, his payload had already been released with surgical precision directly into the reactor's exposed core, a feat of navigation impossible under manual control, especially with dead instruments. Dr. Legasov, reviewing these reports in his temporary laboratory established in Pripyat's abandoned hospital, struggles to maintain scientific objectivity. The accumulating evidence suggests a phenomenon that exists outside the boundaries of known physics, yet the testimonies come from trained military personnel, experienced pilots, and technical specialists whose credibility cannot be questioned. His personal log, discovered decades later among classified documents, reveals his growing conviction that the Chernobyl incident has awakened something that was meant to remain dormant. The local folklore speaks of guardians, he writes in cramped handwriting, entities that watch over places of power, that warn of dangers beyond human comprehension. What if the old stories contain more truth than our modern science is willing to admit? The evacuation of Pripyat proceeds ahead of schedule, but not without incident. Bus driver Yuri Semenov, transporting a group of families from Block 3 of the residential district, reports that a large black bird followed his convoy for the entire 30-kilometer journey to the relocation center. The creature maintained a steady flight pattern directly above the lead bus, visible to every passenger and escort vehicle. Children pointed and waved, mistaking it for a normal raven. Adults watched in silence, recognizing something in the bird's presence that triggered ancestral memories of warnings and omens. When the convoy reached the temporary housing facility in Poliske, the bird circled once and vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and an electric taste in the air. Similar reports emerged from liquidator units throughout the exclusion zone. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Kozlov, leading a decontamination team through the abandoned village of Kopachi, documents multiple sightings of the creature during house-to-house sweeps. In each case, the bird appears near sites of particular radiation concentration, the village school, the collective farm's equipment shed, the Orthodox church, where the first sighting was reported days before the explosion. Most disturbing is the pattern that begins to emerge from these encounters. The creature appears selectively, making itself known only to certain individuals while remaining invisible to others in the same location. Those who see it consistently report the same psychological effect, a profound sense of grief, as if witnessing the death of something precious and irreplaceable. By 1800 hours, the government commission faces an uncomfortable reality. The black bird has become as much a part of the disaster response as helicopters and radiation suits. It watches over their efforts with the patience of something eternal, delivering cryptic warnings that seem to anticipate problems before they occur. As evening falls over the contaminated landscape, Major Kostin makes one final photographic pass over the reactor. This time, he sees not one bird, but dozens, a murder of crows, unlike any in nature, perched on the twisted remains of power lines, cooling towers, and administrative buildings throughout the complex. They sit in perfect silence, their black forms creating patterns that seem almost deliberate against the industrial wreckage. And in their absolute stillness, Kostin recognizes something that chills him more than radiation exposure or equipment failure. They are keeping vigil over the dead. The mission that will forever alter the official understanding of the Chernobyl incident begins with 3 men descending into hell. Engineer Alexei Ananenko, Senior Engineer Valery Bespalov, and Shift Supervisor Boris Baranov volunteer for what they know is a suicide mission: to locate and open the crucial valves that will drain the water-filled basement chambers beneath the destroyed reactor. Above them, 1,200 tons of molten nuclear fuel, the so-called elephant's foot, burns at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. If this radioactive lava contacts the water below, the resulting steam explosion will be 5 times more powerful than the initial disaster, potentially rendering half of Europe uninhabitable for centuries. The 3 liquidators enter the basement complex through Service Corridor 7A, their diving equipment retrofitted with lead-lined breathing apparatus and emergency oxygen supplies. Radiation levels in the flooded chambers register 20,000 Roentgens per hour, lethal doses that will kill them within days regardless of mission success. They carry military-issue RKS 20.03 underwater lamps, emergency cutting tools, and radiation badges that have already turned black. What they do not carry, because no protocol exists for such equipment, are weapons against the supernatural. At 0334 hours, approximately 14 minutes into their descent, Ananenko's radio crackles with a transmission that should be impossible. The signal reaches the surface command post with perfect clarity, despite traveling through water, concrete, and enough radiation to disrupt any known communication system. Command, this is Basement Team. We are not alone down here. The voice belongs to Ananenko, but the tone carries an odd formality, as if he is reading from a prepared statement. We have encountered what appears to be guidance, requesting clarification on mission parameters. Surface teams attempt to respond, but their transmissions fail to penetrate the contaminated environment. Only Ananenko's broadcasts reach them, each message growing stranger and more unsettling. The valves are not where the blueprints indicate. Something is showing us the correct path. It knows the way through the flooded sections. Then after a pause, filled only with the ominous clicking of radiation detectors, it says it has been waiting. It says others will come after us, but we 3 were chosen to bear witness. The truth, pieced together from fragments of recovered video footage and survivor testimony, reveals an encounter that defies every scientific principle governing the Chernobyl response. In the flooded basement of Reactor 4, swimming through water contaminated with enough radiation to sterilize metal, the liquidators find themselves accompanied by creatures that should not exist. The recovered footage, captured on Ananenko's helmet-mounted camera, shows shadowy forms moving through the irradiated water with impossible grace. They appear as black shapes against the already dark environment, but their movement patterns suggest intelligence and purpose. Most remarkably, they seem to generate their own illumination, a faint phosphorescent glow that allows the liquidators to navigate the maze of submerged corridors and machinery. At 0347 hours, the team reaches the primary valve chamber. Here, according to Bespalov's later testimony, they encounter the source of the guidance that has led them through the underwater labyrinth. A creature larger than any they have seen before waits in the chamber's center, perched on the valve wheel that will either save or doom continental Europe. The entity, Bespalov reports, possesses the general form of a massive corvid, but with anatomical impossibilities that strain description. Its wings span the width of the chamber, approximately 4 meters, yet it moves through the water as if flying through air. Its eyes burn with an inner light that penetrates the contaminated liquid, and when it speaks, its voice reverberates through their diving helmets with supernatural clarity. You come seeking to prevent the greater death, the creature communicates, not through sound, but through direct mental transmission. The fire above hungers for the water below. If they meet, the earth itself will scream. The entity then does something that violates every known law of physics. It grasps the valve wheel with appendages that appear solid yet pass through matter at will, and begins turning the mechanism with effortless precision. The massive valve, designed to require specialized tools and significant mechanical advantage, rotates as if weightless. This knowledge comes with a price, the creature continues as water begins to drain from the chamber. Those who prevent the great dying must themselves accept the small death. The atoms in your bones sing with new fire. You have perhaps days, perhaps hours. But then, in an act that will haunt the survivors for the remainder of their shortened lives, the entity extends what might be called mercy. But your sacrifice opens a door. Others will come who can complete what you begin. The fire can be contained, though it will burn for generations. Baranov, the shift supervisor, manages to activate his emergency recording device during this exchange. The audio, classified for 37 years before its eventual declassification, captures not words, but what analysis describes as harmonic resonances, suggesting non-human vocal apparatus producing recognizable semantic content. More disturbing than the creature's communications, however, is its apparent knowledge of future events. The entity describes with clinical precision the exact sequence of actions that will be required to contain the reactor fire over the coming months. The construction of a concrete sarcophagus, the deployment of robotic systems, the development of specialized vehicles capable of operating in extreme radiation environments. Robot armies will march where men cannot walk. Metal servants will build a tomb of stone. The fire will sleep, but it will not die. In 30 years, new guardians will come to build a larger tomb, for the first will crack and the fire will stir. This prophecy, recorded in May 1986, precisely describes the construction of the new safe confinement structure completed in 2016, a project that had not yet been conceived when the basement team made their descent. At 0403 hours, the valve operation is complete. The basement chambers begin draining, eliminating the threat of a secondary steam explosion. The three liquidators, their mission accomplished, begin their ascent to the surface. Behind them, the creatures that guided their path fade into the contaminated darkness, but not before delivering a final message. "Remember us," the entity communicates, as the team reaches the flooded corridor leading back to the surface. When others come to speak of what happened here, remember that some knowledge comes only through sacrifice. The peaceful atom was split by hands that did not understand what they were awakening. The liquidators reached the surface at 0418 hours, having prevented a catastrophe that would have made the initial explosion seem minor by comparison. They are immediately rushed to medical facilities in Moscow, where they will die within weeks from acute radiation syndrome. But their mission accomplishes more than saving Europe from contamination. For the first time in the Chernobyl crisis, the supernatural entities reveal themselves as something more than mere harbingers of doom. They are teachers, guides, and perhaps guardians of knowledge, too dangerous for human understanding. Dr. Legasov, reviewing the basement team's reports, faces a crisis of scientific faith that will ultimately contribute to his own tragic end. In his private notes, he writes, "We have encountered intelligence that predates our atomic age, yet comprehends it better than we do. What other warnings have we missed? What other guardians have we ignored in our rush to harness forces beyond our wisdom?" The decision to classify the supernatural elements of the Chernobyl incident comes not from scientific skepticism, but from a pragmatic understanding of political reality. Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary of the Communist Party, sits at the head of a conference table surrounded by the most powerful men in the Soviet Union, each holding manila folders marked with red diagonal stripes, the highest classification level in the Soviet system. The discussion centers not on whether the reported phenomena are real, but on how to prevent their disclosure from undermining the state's authority in an already precarious international situation. The reactor explosion has exposed fundamental flaws in Soviet nuclear technology. Adding reports of supernatural entities would transform a technical disaster into a crisis of ideology itself. KGB Chairman Viktor Chebrikov presents the intelligence assessment with characteristic brevity. Comrade General Secretary, we have documented testimony from 47 personnel ranging from helicopter pilots to senior engineers. The consistency of their accounts suggests either mass psychological breakdown or genuine anomalous phenomena. In either case, public disclosure would be problematic. The evidence laid before the Central Committee defies easy dismissal. Video footage from multiple sources, audio recordings, radiation measurements that correlate with creature sightings, and most disturbing of all, the prophetic accuracy of information provided by the entities. The basement team's mission succeeded using guidance that contradicted official blueprints but proved more accurate than engineering schematics. Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze voices the concern that haunts every man in the room. If these reports reach Western intelligence services, they will be weaponized against us. The Americans will claim we have lost control not just of our reactors, but of reality itself. Yet the suppression effort faces an unprecedented challenge. Unlike typical state secrets involving human activities, the supernatural entities appear to operate outside Soviet authority. They cannot be arrested, relocated, or eliminated through conventional means. The birds, for lack of a better term, continue their surveillance of the exclusion zone regardless of government directives. Dr. Legasov, summoned to provide scientific context, delivers a presentation that effectively seals his own fate. Standing before the most powerful men in the Soviet Union, he speaks with the desperate honesty of someone who has witnessed the collapse of his worldview. Comrades, what we have encountered at Chernobyl represents a form of intelligence that predates our understanding of nuclear physics. These entities demonstrate knowledge of atomic structure and radiation effects that exceeds our current theoretical framework. They appear to be guardians of some kind, watchers who emerge when humanity ventures too close to forces that could threaten all life. Legasov's presentation includes classified footage from Major Kostin's aerial surveys, showing the creatures arranging themselves in geometric patterns across the exclusion zone. Subsequent analysis reveals these formations correspond precisely to underground contamination flows, as if the entities are monitoring and perhaps influencing the migration of radioactive materials through soil and groundwater. Most troubling, Legasov continues, is their apparent ability to predict future developments with uncanny accuracy. They have described construction techniques and containment methods that our engineers are only now beginning to consider. This suggests either supernatural foresight or access to information sources beyond our comprehension. The response from the Central Committee is swift and unforgiving. Within hours of Legasov's presentation, Operation Raven is authorized, a comprehensive program to suppress all evidence of anomalous phenomena related to the Chernobyl incident. The operation's name, chosen with bitter irony, reflects the state's determination to silence the very creatures it cannot control. GRU Colonel Oleg Penkovsky, appointed as the operations director, receives authority to classify personnel, confiscate recordings, and if necessary, relocate witnesses to secure facilities where their testimony cannot reach foreign intelligence services. The directive specifies that all personnel reporting contact with unidentified biological entities will be considered compromised and subject to indefinite quarantine. But the entities themselves seem to anticipate the suppression effort. Throughout the exclusion zone, liquidator teams report an increase in sightings accompanied by a disturbing new behavior pattern. The creatures begin approaching personnel directly, no longer content to observe from a distance. Senior Lieutenant Pavel Grachev, commanding a radiation survey team near the village of Yaniv, files the final uncensored report of supernatural contact. His team encounters a group of the entities during routine contamination mapping, and for the first time, the creatures deliver what appears to be a coordinated message. Your leaders seek to bury truth with the same soil they use to bury poison. The entities communicate through their characteristic mental transmission. But we are older than your secrets. We remember when the first humans split their first atoms. We remember the warnings that were given then and ignored. The message continues with chilling specificity. Some knowledge cannot be classified. Some warnings cannot be silenced. We will remain in this place of poison until the fire dies, whether that takes years or centuries. And we will remember those who chose secrecy over wisdom. Grachev's report, filed at 1730 hours on the 16th of May, becomes the last official documentation of supernatural contact. By midnight, Operation RAVEN begins in earnest. The suppression campaign operates with ruthless efficiency. Personnel who have reported supernatural encounters are transferred to remote postings or medical facilities. Video footage disappears from official archives. Audio recordings are confiscated during routine security reviews. Even Dr. Legasov finds his access to Chernobyl-related materials severely restricted. However, the entities adapt to the suppression effort with disturbing effectiveness. Unable to communicate through official channels, they begin appearing to family members of liquidators, to journalists covering the disaster, and to international observers visiting the exclusion zone. Each contact follows the same pattern: a brief appearance, a cryptic warning about the long-term consequences of the disaster, and a message specifically condemning the Soviet attempt to hide the truth. Western intelligence services, already suspicious of Soviet secrecy surrounding Chernobyl, begin receiving reports from their assets inside the USSR about unexplained phenomena related to the nuclear accident. CIA Station Chief Robert Gates files a classified assessment suggesting that either the Soviets have lost control of the incident to a degree greater than previously suspected, or they are experiencing some form of collective psychological breakdown among emergency personnel. The British, more willing to entertain unconventional possibilities, dispatch a covert investigation team led by MI6 operative David Cornwell. Their mission: to determine whether the supernatural reports represent genuine anomalous phenomena or an elaborate Soviet disinformation campaign designed to distract from the technical failures that caused the disaster. By the end of May, Operation Raven has successfully removed all official acknowledgement of supernatural activity from the Chernobyl record. Personnel files are sanitized, incident reports are rewritten, and witnesses are either relocated or convinced to retract their statements. The official narrative becomes a model of bureaucratic efficiency: reactor explosion, heroic liquidation effort, successful containment, minimal long-term impact. But in the forests surrounding the dead reactor, the watchers remain. They perch on contaminated trees and circle above the concrete sarcophagus under construction, visible to anyone with eyes to see, but absent from every official photograph, every sanctioned documentary, every approved historical account. Dr. Legasov, his scientific reputation destroyed and his access to the truth he helped uncover systematically eliminated, begins the slow descent toward despair that will ultimately claim his life. In his private journal, he writes his final assessment of the supernatural elements that have been erased from history. We have encountered guardians of knowledge too dangerous for human custody, and our response has been to shoot the messengers. In our determination to maintain control over the narrative, we have forfeited the opportunity to learn from intelligences that understand the forces we have unleashed better than we do ourselves. History will judge this suppression as a greater crime than the reactor explosion itself. Exactly 2 years after the Chernobyl explosion, Dr. Valery Legasov sits at his kitchen table, reviewing documents that officially no longer exist. The manila folders spread before him contain photocopies of reports he smuggled from classified archives before his security clearance was permanently revoked, testimonies of supernatural encounters that Operation Raven failed to completely erase. The intervening years have exacted a terrible toll on those who witnessed the truth. Of the 47 personnel who filed reports of anomalous phenomena, 31 are dead, their deaths attributed to various causes: radiation exposure, heart failure, industrial accidents, and in 3 cases, suicide. The pattern disturbs Legasov more than the radiation poisoning that is slowly killing his own cells. The basement heroes, Ananenko, Bespalov, and Baranov, died within months of their heroic mission, their final weeks spent in Moscow medical facilities, where they were kept isolated from journalists and family members. But according to hospital staff who spoke anonymously to Legasov, their last days were marked by visitations that defied medical explanation. Nurse Svetlana Volkov, who cared for Ananenko during his final hospitalization, reported that a large black bird appeared on the window ledge of his 7th-floor room every evening at sunset. The creature would remain motionless for exactly 1 hour, its presence somehow bringing peace to the dying engineer's radiation-ravaged body. He would stop writhing in pain, Volkov confided to Legasov during a clandestine meeting in Sokolniki Park. The terrible agony that radiation sickness brings, it would just fade away while that thing was there. And he would speak to it, though I never heard it respond. He would thank it for showing them the way through the water. Similar reports emerged from the other liquidators' deaths. Bespalov spoke of dreams in which he returned to the flooded basement, but instead of contaminated water, he swam through starlight while vast wings guided him toward surfaces that sparkled with clean air. Baranov, in his final delirium, repeatedly described the Parliament of Ravens that gathered to honor those who had prevented the greater catastrophe. The suppression campaign, while successful in eliminating official records, has created an underground network of witnesses who share their experiences in whispers and coded conversations. Legasov discovers that liquidator families have begun meeting in secret, trading stories of visitations and dreams that suggest the entities continue to watch over those touched by the disaster. Maria Grachev, widow of Senior Lieutenant Pavel Grachev, describes encounters that began shortly after her husband's transfer to a Siberian posting. The bird appears in her Moscow apartment's window box garden, maintaining vigil over her 2 young children. It never enters the building, but its presence coincides with their most restful sleep and healthiest periods, as if protecting them from the delayed effects of their father's radiation exposure. It doesn't frighten them, she tells Legasov during their meeting in the Novodivichi cemetery. My youngest, Katya, she draws pictures of it. Always the same image, a large black bird with eyes like stars, surrounded by children who are glowing with soft light. She says it's teaching them not to be afraid of the dark. International intelligence services, despite Soviet efforts at secrecy, have begun to piece together fragments of the truth. MI6 operative David Cornwell, operating under diplomatic cover as a cultural attaché, successfully interviews 3 evacuated Pripyat families now residing in Poland. Their testimonies, while lacking official documentation, present a consistent picture of protective entities that appeared during the most chaotic hours of the disaster. The British assessment, classified top secret Umbra and filed under the codename Blackwing, concludes that the Soviets have encountered genuine anomalous phenomena, but are suppressing the information due to ideological constraints. The report recommends enhanced surveillance of Soviet nuclear facilities to detect similar manifestations that might indicate safety concerns at other installations. More disturbing to Western analysts is the apparent prophetic accuracy of communications attributed to the entities. A CIA technical analysis team, working from transcripts obtained through signals intelligence, notes that the creature's predictions about containment methods and long-term radiation effects have proven more accurate than contemporary scientific assessments. Either the Soviets have developed predictive capabilities that exceed our understanding, reads one analyst's marginal note, or they have encountered non-human intelligence with access to information beyond current human knowledge. Both possibilities have profound national security implications. The psychological toll on surviving witnesses becomes evident as the second anniversary of the disaster approaches. Dr. Yuri Israel, who headed the State Committee for Hydrometeorology during the initial response, suffers what his medical records describe as a complex psychological breakdown after repeated attempts to reconcile his scientific training with his experiences in the exclusion zone. Israel's private communications, intercepted by KGB surveillance teams, reveal a man struggling with guilt over his participation in the cover-up. We saw evidence of intelligence that could have helped us understand and mitigate the long-term consequences of nuclear contamination. Instead of studying these phenomena, we chose to deny their existence. How many deaths could have been prevented if we had listened instead of silencing? The entities themselves seem to withdraw from direct contact as the suppression campaign continues, but their influence manifests in subtler ways. Radiation researchers working on long-term contamination studies report inexplicable insights that lead to breakthrough discoveries about cesium migration patterns and biological radiation effects. These advances accelerate cleanup efforts and improve medical treatment for radiation exposure victims, yet they invariably originate from sudden inspirations that researchers cannot logically explain. Dr. Angela Merici, an Italian radiobiologist studying the disaster's medical consequences, experiences what she describes as guided research during her work with liquidator medical records. Complex calculations that should require weeks of analysis suddenly become clear during moments of quiet contemplation, as if information is being provided by an external intelligence. I find myself understanding biological processes that are beyond my formal training, she writes in her research journal. The mathematical relationships between radiation dose and cellular damage become self-evident, as if I'm remembering knowledge rather than discovering it. My colleagues attribute this to intuitive leaps, but the sensation is more like receiving instruction from a patient teacher. As 1988 progresses, Legasov's investigation reveals that the supernatural elements of Chernobyl have not disappeared, but have evolved into a more sophisticated form of interaction with human consciousness. The entities appear